Welcome. This presentation will provide an overview of enterprise funds and how they can be a tool for understanding the costs of running a business-like operation. Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53F1/2, allows for the creation of enterprise funds. This allows communities to maintain a separate accounting and financial reporting mechanism for a broad range of municipal services. With an enterprise fund, all revenues and expenditures related to the enterprise are segregated from the general fund of the municipality. Enterprise accounting allows a community to demonstrate to the public the total cost of providing a service by consolidating all the program's direct and indirect costs into a segregated fund. Example enterprises include water, sewer, and golf. More examples will be provided in this presentation. Enterprise funds can be self-supporting mechanisms that tie spending to a specific purpose, enabling communities to be transparent about revenues and expenditures of a municipal service. Consolidating direct operating, direct capital, and indirect costs helps a community to readily identify a total service cost and determine funding sources. This provides the community with useful information to make decisions on user charges and other budgetary items. The community can analyze how much the user fees and charges support the service and the extent to which the tax levy or any other available revenues may be needed to subsidize the enterprise fund. Like the general fund, enterprise funds can maintain stabilization funds for future infrastructure and capital projects. Enterprise fund assets and depreciation can be recognized in a municipality's financial statements. At year-end, the financial activity of an enterprise fund is measured in terms of an operating surplus or deficit. Note that the fund is eligible for a general fund subsidy to offset costs charged to users of the enterprise service. An operating surplus results in retained earnings, the enterprise fund equivalent of free cash. These funds are retained in the enterprise fund rather than closed to the general fund at fiscal year end. More information on retained earnings will be provided in this presentation. Example enterprises include public utilities such as water, sewer, and trash disposal services, healthcare services such as ambulance service, recreation facilities such as skating rinks, pools, and golf courses, transportation infrastructure such as airports, dock and wharf facilities, and cable television access for public, educational, and governmental programming and broadband services. A community may not establish enterprise funds for normal government operations or services such as public safety, inspectional services, or cemeteries. A community adopts an enterprise by a vote of town meeting or town council in a town or city council with the mayor's approval in a city. Each enterprise fund must be adopted separately with its own vote. Sample voting language for adopting a fund is shown here. The vote clearly states what the service is, in this case water services, and when the fund will commence. The Division of Local Services recommends that the fund commence at the start of a fiscal year, as this sample fund would if approved. Once adopted, the community begins the process of establishing a separate fund within its accounting records and identifying the assets, such as capital items and infrastructure liabilities and equity belonging to the enterprise. The community must operate the enterprise fund for a minimum of 3 years before the provisions may be rescinded like any local adoption law. The financial team and responsible department head should clearly delineate all costs and expenditures associated with the fund so that a fair and equitable rate structure can be developed. As previously stated, an enterprise fund can have an operating surplus or deficit at year-end. An operating surplus occurs when actual revenues received are greater than revenues estimated in the budget, or when budgeted expenditures are greater than actual expenditures and encumbrances. As mentioned, these funds are retained within the fund rather than closed to the general fund. The Division of Local Services Director of Accounts must certify enterprise fund retained earnings as an available fund based on the community's submission of a June 30th balance sheet. Any unappropriated retained earnings will serve as the basis for next year's certification. Once certified, retained earnings may be appropriated to fund direct costs of the enterprise for the current fiscal year, including pay-as-you-go capital costs, fund costs appropriated in the general fund operating budget and allocated to the enterprise for the current fiscal year, reimbursed to the general or other fund for subsidized capital costs of the enterprise not already reimbursed for the 2 full immediately prior fiscal years. Indirect costs are costs of the enterprise that are not readily attributable to a service or department because they are shared with general fund services or departments. There are 2 types of indirect costs. The first type is indirect operating costs. These are costs of services not provided to the public but support all departments, including fuel, liability insurance, equipment maintenance, and employee benefit and insurance costs. The second type is indirect administrative costs. These are shared costs that cannot be assigned to individual services or departments, such as management, financial, legal, or public works. Municipalities should adopt an enterprise fund policy to govern their use. A municipality's enterprise fund policy should establish a funding methodology. An enterprise fund can be self-sufficient or require a general fund subsidy to cover its costs. The policy should define the municipality's approach to retained earnings, including the desired level of retained earnings for each fund and what the retained fund should be used for. The policy should also address indirect costs. As previously discussed, these can include employee benefits and insurances and non-enterprise employee costs. These costs should be defined and calculated according to a formal indirect cost policy and reimbursed to the general fund. The enterprise fund policy should be reviewed annually and amended as needed. For more information on this topic and for contact information for the Division of Local Services, please visit mass.gov/DLS. The Enterprise Fund Manual, available on DLS's website, should also be referred to for additional information.